Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Jiu Jitsu Mindset. My name is Pete Deely, and I'm here with my professor, Professor Lucas Hubo. Professor, good to
Hello,
see you.
guys. Good to see you too, Peter. Great to be here. It's been a while, but
It
it's
has been a
always
while.
always great when you can meet.
You've been competing, you've been all over.
Been a busy year so far, but we're here. This is good.
That's right. Did you get tested for submission coffee in that last competition? I don't know if
Thank,
they
thank God I did not.
they're not screening for it yet.
Man, that was
Or
actually what helped me on my last match. That was only energy left that I had was from submission coffee.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, we remain below the radar for performance enhancing drugs. So, those of you looking for your submission coffee beans, the jujitsumindset.com, you can find it there. And if you may not look as good in that t-shirt, but you can find that t-shirt at the same place that Professor's wearing, Professor Lucas is wearing. Professor Lucas, we are once again very fortunate. We've got another amazing person to talk to this week. And so, Professor Chris Wojcik, thank you so much for agreeing to spend some time with us. We're really grateful that you're here.
Thank you guys for having me. Looking forward to it. Love doing podcasts. So, and I've seen like the Instagram reels that you guys do and stuff. So I'm, excited to do this.
Oh, excellent. Oh, I'm glad you've seen some of them. I keep trying to get Professor to like Photoshop some muscles on me, take a few years off, but
Can you do that for me as well? That
yeah.
would be nice.
So, Professor Chris, I mean, you've got a lot of I feel like interesting and different experiences as a jiu-jitsu athlete, as an instructor, as a competitor, as a teammate, and you have it in different contexts. And I'd like to talk about those different things, but I always have a sort of a philosophical curiosity about the role that jiu-jitsu plays in the lives of the people that we talk to. And you've made a commitment, a dedication to jiu-jitsu. And I wonder, had you not come across it, do you have a sense of what direction things might have taken for you? Like what if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing?
It's funny. I always wanted to be a storyteller, I think.
Hmm.
And so I was like interested in, I'm a writer as well. That was kind of like how I paid my bills when I was like a, purple belt and brown belt. Um,
Okay.
up and coming. And so I thought I was going to become like a movie director, like some sort of starving artist.
Okay.
Ah, very cool.
And I think that, I think I'm glad that I didn't go down that route because I think that that's something that like, granted it's cool and it's romantic, but I think that through jujitsu, I've been able to, you know, first I was able to like what, and I was thinking about this the other day. Like I was first able to kind of help myself a little bit because I started when I was 17.
Hmm.
And I was able to kind of like use jujitsu kind of for personal development,
Right.
to become more mentally strong and more confident, and all of the things that we talk about with jujitsu. And then I think I got to a point when I realized that that was not enough, and I was able to start actually helping people with
Yeah.
jujitsu.
Huh.
So I
Interesting.
don't really know what I would be doing if it wasn't for jujitsu at this point. I'm so far in the rabbit hole that I can't even see out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Did you just because it's impossible not to ask, did you write anything that we might have not seen along the way? Did you get a chance to have something published in the form of a script or
No,
anything?
I just did it for fun.
Okay.
I wrote and so the way I started writing was I was in the COVID quarantine. So I've been doing it for about 4 years. I was like 21 when I started, and I think every person who wants to write, there's just years of saying you want to do it before you actually sit down and do it.
Yeah, for sure.
And the pandemic hit, and I couldn't go to the gym because all the gyms were closed. I was in Chicago at the time.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll try this now. And so I did. And then I was like, oh, this is really fun. But I didn't know kind of what to do next. Like I wrote this draft of this novel that I wanted to
Okay. How cool.
publish. And
Yeah.
then I was like, I don't think that I can make any money doing this. And, I have to graduating college, I have to get a job. So I started doing freelance writing, teaching jujitsu. And then, I did that for a bit, and I was like, teaching jujitsu so much more fun
Yeah.
and so much more reward. I was like writing blogs about trucking and, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff I didn't know anything about, but they were
Sure.
paying me. And I
Yeah.
was like, jujitsu is like so much more valuable both for me, like I feel satisfied, like I was telling my girlfriend, teaching jujitsu is the only job I've ever had that I actually didn't want to quit,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
so
Can
that
you
was
tell
kind of
us
what.
about that moment, Chris? I'm curious, Professor Chris, can you tell us about like, did it snap into focus in a moment like, oh, now I'm going to dedicate myself to this is what I want to do, where you oriented your energy? I mean, obviously this becomes your livelihood. And did that happen in an epiphany or did that happen over time? Like one piece, one little bit, one
So
little
I
step
think
away.
that it really, person who originally planted the seed was my original instructor, a guy named Jeff Seraphin. You guys should
Okay.
definitely have him on. I think he's a great podcast guest.
Please bring him
But
to us.
I always saw him, and I think that, my parents are incredible people, but my parents did not like love their careers,
Right.
you know? And I saw, like, I was young. You're very impressionable when you're 17, 18. That's when I first started training. And I just noticed how happy uh, Jeff was doing, like, teaching and
Mhm.
Right.
being at the gym every day. Like, he had been like, so his gym they've been open for 15 years now. When I started, it was like 7 years or something like this. And
Hmm.
I he was still there, like, classes at 6, he's getting there at 4:30, and he's like happy to be there
Yeah.
2 hours early, hour and a half every day, and to put in extra time. And like, he was just like, that was what he wanted to do. And I was like, that kind of made me realize that this could be something that, like, you can be happy doing this and like love this, and it can be something that, like, also, one, you make an income doing it, and also you, like, aren't just being selfish.
Right.
I think
Right.
that, like, because I've been in the competitor world for a very long time, and I love competing, and it's fun and it's exciting, but you have to be a little bit selfish when you're a competitor.
Mhm.
And I think that when you are teaching, you kind of have the ability to kind of help others, or whether, maybe it's not imparting a bunch of life lessons, but just like,
Yeah. Right.
creating and fostering an environment where people are able to kind of learn for themselves. Um, and, kind of seeing my coach do that for me, and then kind of wanting to recreate that same thing for other people was kind of the epiphany that I had as I became more experienced. So
That's
it was a
pretty awesome.
gradual thing. To answer your question in a
Yeah. No,
long-winded
perfect.
manner.
Go ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah, you
Professor.
usually have a path, right? Like you start sometimes helping on kids class, and then we eventually end up like leading one class and then the other class, and then like, man, I really like this, right? That's how similar on how everything started with me. I had a different career, and little by little, it's like, man, I'm taking way too much of my time on this jujitsu place. Might as well make a change on my life, right?
It's funny. So our gym, we didn't even have a kids class. So
Oh,
I
really?
started with adults. My first class I ever taught was a Saturday morning adults class. I was like a blue belt because
Uh,
Jeff was out of town, and Jeff was out of town. The guy who normally would cover for him was out of town. Like, he must have gone through 5 people before I got asked to do it. Um, but that was the first time that I ever taught. And then I was like, okay, now I want to do this. Then I ended up teaching kids, private lessons, teaching
Mhm.
adults, running competition classes, doing all of these things. And it was sort of this, like, kind of long, like you said, it was a really long process towards realizing that this is what I want to do full time. It was a lot of, like, experimenting, which is, I think that's a sign that you really want to do something. Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
go through the whole process and you're like, yeah, you're still
yeah,
down. That means it's the thing for you.
Yeah, you've
100%.
deeply explored it. You knew a lot about it. Could you talk a little bit about your because Professor Lucas Hupos used this term to me as well, like on competition day. I always have a little bit in my first competitions, and when I say competitions, I mean not your type of competitions, local competitions. I want to be a good team member. I want to participate with the team, but I also am trying to figure out how to keep my own mindset and all are ready for the day. And so he's like, look, competition day is a day it's okay to be selfish. Like on the team, you have to take care of that first. So just that uh, the tiny bit of experience I've had in that, but you've had a lot of experience, a lot of success as a competitor. Could you talk about the balancing between being a part of the community as a leader and teacher that you're giving to people, and then while you're also a competitor and preparing yourself for, the things that you've prepared yourself in the past, and I'm sure currently preparing?
Yeah, so I think that competition, just like teaching, I think it's like a rabbit hole. So like, you start with the like, I did like the nagas and all of that stuff when I was younger. And just kind of slowly worked my way up, and eventually it's like I'm doing ADCC in August. It's like we've come a long way from doing nagas at the local community college. And as I've kind of climbed the ladder, I've realized that the more that like the higher the level that you compete, the more that it demands from you, and the less that you are able to kind of give to everybody else.
Hmm.
So that is like kind of a harsh truth. Like that's probably not what you want to hear. But I think that the good thing about that is when you do that and you have that experience, you're kind of like at least for me, like after you know, if I compete, I'm good for a little bit. I'm not like one of those people who like I think one thing that I was afraid of was I was always scared that like, oh, I'm gonna go down this selfish rabbit hole and it's never gonna end and I'm gonna become like, a jerk. And that wasn't what happened for me. I was like I compete, then I'm good. And then like
Okay.
next time I'm gonna go coach or help my friends or, you know, train or like well, at training out in Austin, like we have like the Who's Number One shows, which are like big
Yeah.
professional jiu-jitsu shows where like people fly in from all over the world
Yeah.
and it's like a big
Mhm.
deal. I'll do mine, like, trials, whatever. Then we've got like, Who's Number One is like 3 weeks out. I'm good to help the guys train. I'm good to go watch.
Right.
I'm happy with that because I've have like scratched my itch and I don't need to like always be kind of the center of attention. Does that make sense? And so I think that the balance is like you should like it's just like anything, you should be a little bit selfish, but you also, you don't need to be selfish every day all the time. And you can also like benefit from both aspects. Like going to compete, going to watch will make you a better competitor because you'll get the experience of being at a competition from a
Right.
different perspective. Like one thing that I've noticed, like when I go to compete, especially when I was younger, I would always be really emotional. I would like, I want to win for me. I want this medal. I worked hard.
Mhm.
And then when you go as a spectator, you realize that everybody wants to win. No one really wants to win more. Everybody kind of wants to win the same.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so you're like a little bit less then the next time you go in to compete yourself, you're a little less emotional, you're a little more objective, which makes you calmer, which will actually make you compete better.
For sure.
True. Yeah, I was actually this week I saw Matt Sarah talking about that. Peter, I'm not sure if like you know Matt Sarah. He should be a former UFC fighter, but one of the first hands of grace black belt.
Okay.
And he has like his jiu-jitsu school now, and he was saying that every tournament is equivalent to 3 months of training usually. So if you go for a tournament, right, of course you're preparing yourself, so have all that extra development that you're having for that tournament day, but also for the amount of emotional that you're leading, for
Yeah.
the pressure, for the speed, for the intensity. Like one tournament is equivalent to 3 months of training, right? So like I thought it was really interesting because you always feel that, right? Sometimes, especially in the beginning, you go there to compete and sometimes you just blank, you space out, you have no idea what's going on, you commit so many mistakes. And then you go back to the gym, everything looks like slow down, looks like your cardio is better, looks like your techniques are sharper, right? Like you take all that adrenaline and emotions out and like you keep putting back together the tournament. So that's why also you see people that are competing more often having like a fast improvement at the same time, right? They're putting that emotion and that stress under training, which allows them to improve so much.
I feel like in my experience, that effect happens. That's like, I think when you compete, as like the more you compete, the more it slows down.
Mm-hmm.
So like
Yeah.
when you first start competing, like if you're a white belt and you compete, you get like you're so much ahead of the other white belts.
Uh,
But then, like if you're a black belt and you compete, you get better for like than someone who doesn't compete, but like it's like not as much anymore. I feel like it's like superpowers, like you know, but over time you start to like kind of not that it stops working, but it gets incrementally smaller over time
Yeah.
in terms of the like rapid improvement from competition. But that's why I always like when I work with beginners, I always say like you need to compete as much as you can. Like, you know, I when I was a kid, I did like folk style wrestling uh, in seventh grade through high school. So like 6 years. I was not very good. You know, I wrestled in Illinois and it's like one of the toughest wrestling states.
Yeah.
And so I was like okay in Illinois, but like that made me like pretty good everywhere else. But like the thing that I really got from wrestling, because I didn't get a college scholarship, I didn't get like, you know, I never made it to state. I wasn't very good, but like I got so many reps of competing
Yeah.
that like it just became like this thing that it was like competition is just a thing I always do. So it wasn't
Uh-huh.
like it wasn't abnormal to compete.
Uh-huh.
I think that when I started doing jiu-jitsu and then I was like, oh well, you know, I'm training all the time. I should probably just compete, you know. And I was like, oh, thank God I don't have to compete every week because wrestling you have to compete every week. It's like, God, there's
Right.
so much. Jiu-jitsu is like, oh, I can compete once a month. And even that is a lot for, you know, some people. But
Yeah.
for me, I was like, once a month, this is so easy, you know? And then
Right.
like that just accelerated my progress in jiu-jitsu. So I always tell people who are beginners, I'm like, you should compete like you know competition is like you get out what you put in, so I would just you know put in as much as you can, obviously stay healthy, you know, you don't want to compete if you're not training, but like if you can compete you're going to really accelerate your progress, especially as a beginner.
And I think a stress inoculation. I mean, the for me in the first year, I'd be nervous going to class. You know, like I would
Hmm.
have anxiety about like as a my first year, like am I going to be okay just in class? And then I had a chance as a white belt to do competitions with my appropriate age group and so on and so forth. But the stress of the competitions made me relax more in class, and then as I went the learning process for me when being less anxious made it easier to learn. And I don't think I'm unique in that regard. I think like the more you can kind of be calm about that. Oh, Professor Lucas, I didn't mean to cut you off. You got something you
No,
want to
no.
ask
I
next?
just say yes, like I was just
Yeah,
agreeing with you.
yeah.
I
Well,
think
what's
that's
your
one of like can I add one thing? I just think
yeah, yeah,
that's one of the beautiful things about like competition and jujitsu. Like as a like for me when I was you know a kid wrestling, there's no like in wrestling there's no white belt division. Like
right, right. Yeah,
I started wrestling when I was 12, which is, you know, but there were kids in Illinois, wrestling is huge. Like
sure.
there were I was wrestling the kids who started wrestling when they were 5,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
like they're like, you know, if you know, it's not the same when you're a kid, but say they're like brown belt, purple belt level in wrestling. I'm a white belt, like brand new white belt.
sure. Yeah,
Uh,
And we have to all be in the same division. And all I was really learning was how to lose, you know, and I was just getting beat
yeah,
up
yeah,
every weekend. Like
yeah,
my eighth grade year, and I always tell this to people who get like discouraged when a competition doesn't well. When I was in eighth grade, I won 4 matches and I lost 28. So I
yeah,
got beat up every weekend for
yeah,
like an entire winter.
yeah.
So I think that like, you know, one of the nice things about jujitsu is like you get to compete with people who are your age group, your size, and your experience level. So you're not expected to be like crazy talented. You can kind of
uh,
like you can like it's a fairly level
it's
playing
pretty
field.
fair, yeah. It's really fair.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu
Which
competition
is
is really
not the case in
fair.
wrestling.
Well, Professor Chris, could you tell us a little bit about your current training situation in Austin? Because it seems like there's a sort of a special group that you could talk about that you're a part of, and kind of how that
Yeah.
fits into your current relationship to jujitsu, both as a competitor, as a teacher, within this community that you're in now.
Yeah, so I about a year ago I relocated to Austin. So I was in Chicago. I was actually born in London, but raised in Chicago from the time I was like 4. And
Okay.
I trained and did all my belts through Jeff in Chicago. And I moved to Austin a year ago, and literally the only reason I moved to Austin was because I wanted to train with, you know, like as high a level people as I could to try to get into ADCC. That was my goal.
Hmm.
And So I'm training at the B team now. Guys like Nikki Ryan, Nikki Rod, Ethan Collinston, these guys, and and now we have, for ADCC camp, we have Dima Muravani running it. He's from Germany. He helped Joseph Chen win the ADCC trials. He's kind of a lesser known coach, but he's like a new coach who's, a lot of really progressive training ideas. Like we do like heart rate based training. So it's like this,
Mm,
he'll be like, this round is low heart rate. So it's like a warm up round. Like this round is
Uh,
medium, which means it's like competition, but not like berserk mode. Then he's like, this round is like high heart rate. So it's like full speed. So you're not really like working stuff. You're more trying to push your body. So
okay.
we're doing a lot of kind of different stuff. And the biggest thing that I've learned since I've been here I've really taken as an instructor, because my goal is to, open up a gym probably in, next couple of years, year or two. The biggest thing that I've learned is just like kind of how much I can still learn. I moved here, I was already a black belt. When I moved down here, like my first week, I'm getting tapped by purple belts, like because they're just different. And so it was very humbling, but also like really like inspiring in a way, because like I think when you're an instructor, you kind of have this like, at least I did at first, especially because I was like a young teacher and I was like a black belt and I was already doing well in, competitive jujitsu. Had this like expectation that I had to be the guy all the time. Like I had to be a mate, I had to win everything. I had to like, no one could tap me in training because I am the black belt. And especially I was like, I placed in ADCC trials. No one can tap me, blah, blah, blah. And then I would come down here and well, no one cares what I did in, before. They're just like, everyone's like trying to be the top dog, and it's competitive and it's tough, but really humbling. And so I kind of just was like, if I keep the mindset that I had before, where I was like trying to be the best all the time, I won't last. Like
Mm,
my body's gonna break down. I'm
mhm.
gonna hate jujitsu. And so I just kind of like I the way that I train now is very like and it sounds cliche, but like I train with so much less ego than I used to. Like people can tap me, whatever. I'm just trying to the training is training. I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to develop new skills. I'm trying to, obviously do well, and I feel better when I do well, but like I don't let a like when I was younger, I would let a bad training day ruin my day. And now
Mhm.
mhm.
like a bad training day is still like a day on the mat training
Yes.
is way better than a day, which is like cliche. And I had to become a world-class black belt to realize that. But like now I'm like super like laid back about my training and I enjoy it so much more, which is ironically making me better faster.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wild.
So that's kind of one thing that I've really learned kind of being down here. And I still have like a really close relationship with everybody back in Chicago. So like I'm going
Uh,
next week, I'm going for 10 days. Like it wasn't a bad split. Like when I chose to move down here, my coach, he was like, that's awesome. I want when you come back, show us everything you learn. And so like that's kind of what I do. Like I had a seminar tour up in Chicago next week, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to show everybody kind of the cool stuff that we're doing. And the technique, it's not just techniques, it's like training mindsets,
Yeah.
it's
yeah.
things like ways of thinking about jujitsu,
Mhm.
like not just moves, like everything. So it's been really really inspiring. Like I fell in love with jujitsu again when I moved here.
Nice. It's everything else that make the sport is making the sport more professional, right? Like it's not like you said, it's the high quality people, it's the technique, but it's also everything else that makes them be able to do what they do, right? To perform in the way how they're performing. So I believe for what you're saying, you have been doing way more no gi for the last years, right? That always the case for you? Like you're always like a little more no gi, or more was more a recent transition?
So I mean, I love doing the gi. I actually like I did. So I wrestled. So I always was better at no gi. Like it just was easier for me.
Mhm.
Um, but I always liked the gi more until like 2022. So like 2 years have been no gi. But I was like, I still train in the gi when I'm home because they all train in the gi, you know, so I'll
Uh-huh.
train sometimes and I like it. I used to love like berimbolos and like lapels and all these things. But it was kind of like, I want to try to be a professional level competitor. And I like looked at myself in the mirror. I've had matches against gi world champions. I've had matches against no gi world champions. The no gi matches always were better. So I was like, I have a better chance of, you
Uh-huh.
know, reaching my competitive jujitsu goals if I focus on this. And so I've kind of like the last 2 years just been really focused on Nogi.
And now you're getting ready for the ADCC this year?
Yeah, I'm doing ADCC in the 88 kilogram division
That
in
must be pretty
August. So
exciting.
yeah, it's crazy. And the training camp that we've got here is like wild. It's super intense and super fun and you know, really cool experience.
That's awesome.
When I listen to your journey, Professor Chris, you, if you take just its relationship to jujitsu out of the and listen to sort of the themes for me, and I'm meaningfully older than you, it's a story of maturation, is what it sounds to me. Like you matured in your relationship to the experience of jujitsu, your how you are, and that in your maturation, you're getting better and better. Um, and I'm curious if that division between your life off the mats and on the mats, that the ways in which you changed in these last 9 years, that you see present in your character, attitudes, in all the places that are not directly connected to jujitsu too.
Yeah, I think that my growth, I think that the growth off the mat was always slightly behind the growth on the mat. So I think
Okay.
that like, you know, I think that if you look at the last 9 years, I'm definitely way, you know, I struggle with less anxiety. I struggle with less, you know, I don't really get sad as much as I used to. I feel like I have more direction in my life. I'm
Yeah.
way happier at, you know, I'm 26. I'm way happier than I was when I was 19 when I was first training.
Right.
But I think that, you know, a lot of the lessons that I've learned, first I learned them in jujitsu. Like I learned, okay,
Yeah.
don't really have an ego when you're training. And then it takes like, there's like a 6 month to a year lag where I'm
Yeah.
like,
I
the
like it.
rest of my life, I'm still struggling
Yeah.
with this. And then I'm like, oh, wait, but I should maybe, you know, when I train, I'm really happy because I'm not like beating myself up so much. Maybe I should try that in other things too.
Yeah.
So it definitely helps, but I feel like, you know, maybe it takes me a while to apply it. Maybe it takes me a while to internalize it. But like, I think that you know, jujitsu has definitely helped. And I think the other thing that's really helped me off the mat is like, I have like a really high quality mentor in my
Yeah.
original coach, Jeff. Like, he's one of the most level headed people that I've ever met and like a really good leader. And
Yeah.
so, like, it gives me one, like, you know, it's like good to have someone who like you can bounce things off, but also
Sure.
too, it's like kind of a high standard of like
Yeah. Nice.
Uh,
this is how a quality person behaves.
Yes.
Can you do this? And I'm
Yeah.
like, yes, but it's hard, you know,
Yeah.
and you kind of gain respect for
Yes.
like good mentors. So that I think is the two things that really have helped me, you know, develop.
That's one of my favorite things I've heard in a long time, because I think it for me, the descriptions of learn something on the mat, because it's crystallized and it's concrete. That an overdeveloped ego is an impediment to getting better and a roadway, in my opinion, to injury. If you're insisting on that, then in my mind, it's a lack of honesty is really what that means. Like you're insisting on things that aren't actually true, that I'm not going to tap when you should tap. Well, okay, you're going to get hurt then, and you're not going to understand things. And so the crystallization of life's like conflicts on the mat, in my mind, if in a carefully observed way, can make you um, you can take those lessons off them. And we talk about that every episode. But the one of the things you said that makes me just excited is that to be able to see somebody who has mastered those things in life as in front of you as an example now gives you a yardstick, as you say, like, well, what does it mean to be kind and compassionate and a good listener and all that? Well, those are interesting ideas, and when you put them in practice, they require discipline and effort. They don't come without their own sort of training. So I think that's fortunate. I mean, not everybody has a mentor that is in their life. It's not, and then some people don't accept the discipline of like, oh, here's somebody, I would like to be like this person. That's pretty exciting to me. As an instructor, do you have a story of perhaps where you might have been even inadvertently that person to one of your students that maybe they came in and they reoriented their thinking or behavior based on things they were learning from you?
I think a lot of so I taught a lot of I would say that there's a lot of people that I worked with, especially because I was teaching back in Chicago quite a bit. There's a lot of people I think who they changed the way that they were uh thinking about competition because of kind of how I would talk about it, and they would think about it in a much like, let's say, healthier manner.
Okay.
And because they were changing the way they're thinking about it, they were performing better. So that's what's I think
Right.
really cool is like when you're able to have this kind of indirect improvement. So you're like you are, you like you're say you're struggling a lot with anxiety about competing, and the student is able to kind of like learn to care less and then do better. So it feels counterintuitive, right? Like that caring less would make you perform better. But like when I'm able to kind of explain how it works with people and seeing that application, and a lot of like people who, because I ran the competition class, so like a lot of the
Sure.
ways that I think about improving at jiu-jitsu are measured via competition. But also too, like I think kind of the next phase for me is like then recently I started thinking about jujitsu in terms of like just holistic improvement. And so that's kind
Right.
of the next lesson that I'm going to try to apply with people is like this idea of like training, like, what are you getting ready for? Like that's what we always say when you're competing, like, oh, what are you getting ready for? Like, I'm just training, and like just trying to improve, which I
Right.
think people don't really say that as much. So that's kind of the next thing that I'm trying
Yeah.
to work on with people is like just being able to like focus on getting better, and then the competition comes.
Yes. Yeah, we have had a professor, Jason Hawkins, wrote a book called the Jiu Jitsu Sutras, and is these ideas that you're talking about. He wrote a long book breaking things into small sort of lessons, and one of the ideas in that book that I take with me, not just to Jiu Jitsu, but my life in general, is this quality of devotion that you have to go and do the work uh, divorced from the outcome. Like if you're in like every training session, if it has to have a certain outcome, if it has to be observably improving yourself, I think it's a recipe for giving up because the improvements in life and in jiu-jitsu are sometimes happening below the surface. A bad training day for me as a beginner, I'm like, oh, I'm getting worse. Like I'm coming in here and how is it possible I'm going backwards? But I know intellectually that the more I continue to devote myself to showing up, the more that trajectory goes up. And the only way it goes down is if I quit. But that is proven to be true in my life in pretty much everything. Like the one surefire way to fail is to just throw up your hands and walk away from it. But if you continue to gnaw at whatever bone you're chewing on, you seem to get there in the end. So anyway, that's it. That's interesting. Yeah, well, I'll be interested in following the story of how you're going to bring those things to people and how you're going to teach people, because I think that's one of I think sport in general does that because it crystallizes conflict in a way that the consequences of it are, it's different in global politics. The consequences of that going wrong, it's a very different deal. You know, LeBron James and the professional athletes of the world, the outcome may have economic uh, advantages, but the world rarely changes based on who's the World Cup champion, NBA winner, whatever. But
One thing
yeah, go ahead.
One thing I think that is like a challenge that, I feel like it's almost cliche at this point, like the jujitsu instructor who is like sharing too many life lessons, in class.
Yeah, yeah, okay,
It's like a meme.
okay,
And so I think that's something that we have to deal with is like you have to be able to kind of like And it's like just for me, like I like teaching people stuff that I'm learning, but we have to know how to do it in a way that is like not preachy, you know? So like I think the way that I try to do it is like I try to like explain it based on jujitsu stuff
Yeah,
because
yeah,
like that
right,
is my like I've been training jujitsu for 10 years, so I'm like
right.
I know a lot more about jujitsu than most people, but like 26 also. So I'm like
Yeah,
kind of an idiot in other aspects of my life.
right,
So like
right.
for me, it's like I learn these things through jujitsu first, and then I have to like the rest of my life play like if someone else comes into like with more wisdom, they might be like, oh, I know this thing and I'm gonna apply it to jujitsu. For me, it's like I'm trying to like teach people stuff in a way that is like I want it to be like easily digestible, you know?
Right. Yeah.
I want it because I feel like for me, like if I think competition is a good way to do that. But
Hmm.
also it's like I don't want to be only focused on competition. So it's just like a interesting balancing act because you want to share the lessons, but you don't want to turn people off of the lessons because the delivery is,
Yeah,
obnoxious.
no, I totally agree. And I think it doesn't work if you're if you're doing it in that explicit manner. It works because of like not talking about, well, learning hard things makes you better, but actually teaching hard things to someone to learn hard things. Like the if and the self-awareness of what this is a metaphor of has to come from the person itself, because the metaphor can't be illuminated by somebody else. Like it has to be something that that person connects. Like, oh, okay, like getting out of control is a miserable experience, but however, it's not impossible. And so, if that metaphor of there are other very difficult experiences in life that look impossible at the moment, but that there are ways in which you can increase your chances of getting over it. If you're dealing with it explicitly, I think on the mats, then it feels like, well, I'm in church. This is not what I came here for. But if you're teaching what we're there to teach, over time, I think hopefully the self-aware people of the world, the metaphor becomes present within the jujitsu lesson.
And I
Yeah. And
think
I think
that's
that a
a
good teacher is able to teach you like things that you like you learn things like a good teacher is able to teach you stuff about life through a different medium.
Right, right.
yes, exactly. That's what I'm gonna say. I think that's is a process of becoming right. A good teacher is also find a way to connect with who you're
Yes,
teaching. For they be able to their own assumptions in some things, right? Without you telling them. But is that thing like, oh, 5 years from now, you remember a lesson that someone taught you, 5 years ago. It's like, oh, that's what that means, right? And those, I think that all those things comes with like a really good teacher understand when to do which thing, right? When to teach each movement or lesson or whatever they're trying to do.
And
yeah,
also
that's
that like every student is different.
right.
100%, yeah.
Like everyone
Adapting
needs
every
different
time that
stuff.
you're teaching. Yeah.
Yeah, Professor Lucas talks a little bit about like, it's the job of the teacher to be figuring out how to teach the student where the student is, not the job of the student to necessarily accommodate the limits of the professor's, the teachings, and that finding that connection lies on the leadership of the person, at the front of the class. There's one of the things that I've loved about our community, Professor Chris, is, when I began watching how Professor Lucas set the tone with the kids, the youngest of the kids, was something that really attracted me because the values of the community were obvious in how the class was. So we're not here, this wasn't a training ground for 5 and 6 year olds to end up the world champions. This is a training ground to learn how to control yourself, learn how to use your body, learn how to work with somebody else. And having participated in many sports over my entire life, that um, dynamic between the training partners for me is unique. Wrestling probably is, I never was a wrestler, so probably has a similar dynamic, but you can't learn jujitsu effectively on your own. You need that other person, and you have to have that level of trust. And to watch how, they build, Professor Lucas builds that with the kids. I knew that there was a philosophical and kind of that underlie the community. And we've grown super rapidly over time. And I think although everybody wants to learn good jiu-jitsu, I think they want to be a part of something that feeds who they are as a person, in addition to that.
I
Oh,
think as I've gotten older, community has become more important in my like jujitsu journey. Like I
yeah,
care more about like being a part of a good community than I do whatever I'm gonna learn on the mat. You
yeah,
know, especially now, like all of the best, like you want to learn the best jujitsu, like Gordon Ryan has a million instructionals, you know. Unfortunately for all of us, it's like going to be really hard to teach like the better moves that have more, you know, competitive merit because like of the internet, there's so much more competition. But like one thing that you can't like create online that you can create in a physical environment is like a good environment with people who are supportive and people who want to
right,
learn. And you know, as an instructor you can show, you know, what you do well and you can facilitate learning. And if you can do that like if you can do that well, that's better than, you know, any jujitsu that you learn on the mat. And then, you know, everyone's going to get better, everyone's going to have a good time, and that's really what this is about, right? You know, we're just trying to learn some stuff and have a good time.
without a doubt. Well, Professor Lucas, we gotta. This is another conversation. We could go on and on. So, anything as we kind of head to the end of the time you want to ask before?
Oh man, now it's been a really, really cool conversation here, Professor Chris. And I just want to wish him all the best luck on the next few tournaments, especially the one that he's preparing the most for ADCC is the, you know, is the Oscar of grappling and jiu-jitsu every other year. You know, the best of the best are there. So excited to watch you over there, man. So keep, you know, keep the good work, keep the training, and wish all the best for you.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it. Super excited.
Well, yeah, I'll be doing the same, Professor Chris, and you know, your mentor, if Professor Jeff would like to come join us, we'd love to talk with him as well. And it seems like I'm. It's funny when you say the older that I get, and I realize, oh, I'm more than twice. And I'm 54, so I'm more than twice your age. So it's encouraging to sort of you know, as you're talking about what you're learning and kind of the direction, you know, the world's being improved by what you're doing out there. I'm really grateful that you're spending your energy the way that you are. So thank you very much. And perhaps you'll come back and talk to us another time. We'd love to talk to you again. And
Yeah, anytime. Let me know.
all right. Well, thank you, brother.
All right.